The last Terran cruiser above Harridan 4 went dark at 0400 hours Standard Galactic Time. It didn't explode, no glorious final salvo, no plasma guts flaring against the void. It simply vanished, swallowed by the silence that always followed the Auric Dominion. Captain Riva Mbenge watched the tactical feed from a rusted-out listening post clinging to the edge of the wild expanse. Her jaw clenched. There were no screams in space, no blood on the data feed, but the implication was written in red pings: 18,000 crew lost. Gone. Another bite taken out of what was left of humanity's battered interstellar reach. Her throat tightened. She could still picture the faces crew she'd trained with, joked with, argued with over stale protein packs. Harridan 4 had held for 6 months. Some of her closest friends had been rotated through. Now their names were ghosts blinking red on a dead screen. She remembered a birthday celebration in the Harridan mess hall, someone sneaking contraband chocolate bars in through black market runs. The way Lieutenant Barda used to whistle old Earth tunes between shifts. Those details stabbed deeper than the casualty count. It wasn't just loss. It was erasure. It was watching a part of herself get consumed by a war that had no face, no voice, only annihilation. She exhaled slowly, knuckles white against the console. And then she flicked the feed off, clinging to the edge of the wild expanse. Her jaw clenched. There were no screams in space, no blood on the data feed, but the implication was written in red pings: 18,000 crew lost. Gone. Another bite taken out of what was left of humanity's battered interstellar reach. Her throat tightened. She could still picture the faces crew she'd trained with, joked with, argued with over stale protein packs. Harridan 4 had held for 6 months. Some of her closest friends had been rotated through. Now their names were ghosts blinking red on a dead screen. The Dominion wasn't a war. It was erosion, slow, cold, relentless. Riva flicked off the feed with a hiss of disgust and turned away from the flickering screen. The ops room around her was more rust than alloy, the lights dimmed to conserve power. A trio of conscripts sat at terminals designed for 6, and none of them met her eye. They'd seen the readout too. Harridan 4 was gone, same as Vornak Station, Kestrel Reach, and the Zephyne Corridor. Same as a dozen other names she'd known, defended, bled for. A voice buzzed in her comm. Captain Mbenge, Command wants your sitrep. Riva tapped her wrist unit. Tell Command my sitrep hasn't changed. We're outnumbered, outgunned, and clinging to a frontier outpost with less defensive infrastructure than a refugee barge. A pause. Then a dry chuckle. It was Lieutenant Kasparian, her XO. So, the usual. She allowed herself the ghost of a smile. Exactly. The Dominion didn't send envoys. They didn't make demands. They just arrived. Spore ships would see the upper atmosphere, releasing nanohive clouds that boiled sensors and melted skin. Then the ground swarms would follow, 10-foot insectoids with armored thoraxes and hive-synced precision. No mercy. No deviation. Just conquest, planet by planet, like watching ants dismantle a corpse. Humanity had tried everything. Shock assaults. Strategic retreats. Even orbital scorched earth tactics. The Dominion kept coming. And now Command was sending her, Riva Mbenge, the same captain who'd been demoted after the Aline massacre, to observe the frontier. Observe. Like she was some academic peering into a microscope, not the only ranked officer left alive in this entire sector. She walked out of the ops center and into the biting wind of Tolmec 3's upper ridge, where the wind carried a low, pulsing hum like a distant animal heartbeat, and the scent of crushed stone and electric moss clung to the air. The sky was the color of bruised steel, clouds dragging like torn canvas across the horizon. Down in the jungles, something massive moved, trees swaying, leaves rustling in waves. The planet smelled like damp moss, iron-rich soil, and something sharper beneath it, ozone and crushed citrus, alien and electric. Tolmec 3 was alive in a way most weren't. Old. Watchful. She didn't like it. A corporal jogged up the rocky path toward her, face flushed. Ma'am, Scout Team Echo went silent 4 hours ago. Last ping was deep jungle, northern quadrant. No response to hails. Riva didn't hesitate. Mobilize Bravo Squad. Full recon loadout. I want boots on the ground in 20. The corporal blinked. Ma'am, regs say. I don't care what regs say. That's my team out there. Move. He saluted and ran. 18 minutes later, Riva was skimming treetop level in a 6-seater gravskiff, wind howling through the open hull. Her team was silent, focused veterans all, the kind who didn't need pep talks. Sergeant Yates checked his flechette launcher with reverent care. A light drizzle began to tap against their armor. The jungle swallowed them whole. Cut engines, she ordered. The pilot eased off. The skiff drifted silently between gnarled trunks and bioluminescent mosses. Vines thick as a man's torso dangled like nooses. The canopy choked off light, painting everything in twilight green. Then the smell hit a sharp, earthy, and wrong, like burnt copper and overripe fruit. They found the first body 100 meters in. The undergrowth had thinned just enough to reveal it hung upside down from a vine-wrapped branch like a ritual offering. A wet, metallic tang hung in the air. The silence around them deepened as if even the jungle was holding its breath. Their boots squelched in the mossy ground, every step louder than it should have been. Riva felt the hairs on her arms rise. Something had stripped the man of gear, flayed his skin into curling ribbons, and scooped out his eyes with surgical precision. No animal had done this. No Auric either. This was something else. Something deliberate. Something watching. Hung upside down from a branch. Stripped of gear. Skin flayed in thin, precise ribbons. Eyes missing. Yates whispered, "This isn't Auric work." He was right. Auric didn't play with their kills. Riva knelt beside the corpse. There were puncture marks near the base of the skull, small, clean, almost surgical. The jungle was dead silent. Even the insect chatter had stopped. She tapped her comm base. "This is Mbenge. We've got casualties. Unidentified hostile. Possibly non-dominion. Static. Repeat, communication down. Possible interference. Suggest." The world shifted. That was the only way her brain could register it. One moment she was surrounded by her squad, by jungle, by certainty, and then it was like the forest itself moved. Shapes peeled from the trees, cloaked in optical shimmer. Not machines. Not drones. Something alive. Yates shouted. Gunfire erupted. Plasma bolts lit up the dark, casting stark shadows. Riva drew her sidearm and fired at the nearest shimmer, hit something that shrieked like broken glass. And then darkness fell. Not unconsciousness. Not blindness. Actual darkness. Everything shut off, the helmets, HUDs, weapons. The very concept of technology evaporated. She could still feel the gun in her hand, but it was dead weight. The lights on their armor winked out. Their radios went silent. It was as if the jungle had decided. A voice, not Terran, whispered through the black. It coiled around her mind like smoke, not speaking in language but in sensation and ancient weight, a sadness that spanned epochs and a scrutiny sharp as obsidian. Something had noticed her. Wait her. Not in words. In intent. Not in words. In intent. You brought war here. But you are not the first. Nor the worst. You will come. You will listen. Riva screamed as something cold and many-limbed touched the back of her neck. Then everything went white. She woke in a circle of stone under alien stars. Her weapons were gone. Her team gone. But not her mind. That voice was still there. And something else too, a presence watching with interest. Captain Riva Mbenge had just met Tolmec 3's true inhabitants. And they were far more than anyone expected. The stars above her were too close. They blinked and pulsed in alien rhythms as if some vast intelligence beyond the sky was breathing through them. Riva's first breath was sharp with cold, real cold, not atmospheric chill but bone-deep, cosmic cold, as if she'd been pulled through space and dropped without warning. Her hands scrambled against stone. Not jungle floor. Not ship plating. She was in a shallow pit ringed with black monoliths etched in glowing cyan veins. The sight of them sent a shiver down her spine, beautiful, terrible things that hummed with an energy she didn't understand. It felt like standing in the bones of a god. Her chest tightened with awe and the irrational instinct to flee as if her presence here was a cosmic trespass. They pulsed in sync with her heartbeat. No, that wasn't right. They pulsed before her heartbeat. Anticipating. Leading. A wave of vertigo rolled through her chest. It felt like the planet itself was listening to her body and choosing whether to keep her alive. Riva tried to stand, but her legs buckled. She caught herself on a stone slab slick with condensation. Her gear was gone. Armor, weapons, even her wrist comm. She was wearing a plain black undersuit and nothing else. Her skin crawled. Yates, she croaked. Mendez? Anyone? No answer. No birds. No wind. No insects. Only the stars and the stones and the faint thrum in her skull. Then she felt it again, the presence. A weight on the edges of her consciousness, like standing in a room where something else breathed behind the walls. Not hostile. Not friendly. Just curious. A voice, or what passed for one, swept into her thoughts. It wasn't language, not really. It moved like smoke across water. But this time it tried to take shape. You are flesh. Heat. Violence. But you are listening. This is rare. She swallowed hard, backing against a pillar. Who are you? What do you want? No answer. Just another pulse through the monoliths. Then the stone in front of her shimmered. Shifted. A shape flowed up from the rock like ink rising through glass. It formed legs, 6 of them. A torso. A triangular head that rippled with micro-expressions like liquid crystal. Not insect. Not reptile. Something else entirely. Riva's hand twitched toward a weapon she no longer carried. The creature tilted its head. The space between them thickened, expectant, weighty. War chases you. It burns across your path. You bring it here. She forced her voice to stay steady. Not by choice. The Dominion attacked us. We're defending ourselves. The others said the same. The Korash. The Valai. The ISS Korn. They burned too. The jungle does not forget what bleeds it. The image around her changed. The pillars flared, casting images in the air, races she didn't recognize. Alien ships falling from the sky in flame. Auric legions crashing through jungle. Civilizations erased. Riva clenched her fists. It wasn't just history, it was accusation. And shame. A deep, twisting horror settled in her gut as the canopy lit with scenes of Terran fire. She had worn that armor. Walked with those troops. If not for a few reassignments, she might have been there, torch in hand. And then, humans. A Terran dropship spewing fire across trees. Marines in powered armor, flamethrowers igniting the canopy. Screams alien and human blended together. Her stomach turned. Guilt surged in her throat. That wasn't me, she said. That wasn't us. The creature stepped forward, slow and deliberate. Its skin flickered with unfamiliar glyphs. No. But you carry them. You speak with their mouth. Their minds burned the soil. Then let me speak differently. There was a long silence. Then, you will learn. Or you will leave. The choice is yours. For now, walk. The stones behind her shimmered and parted. The jungle loomed beyond, but it wasn't the same. The trees were too tall, bending in impossible arcs. The ground glowed faintly, patterned with trails of bioluminescent symbols that shifted when she blinked. A second figure stepped into view, taller than the first, darker, armored in bark and bone. Its surface gleamed with sap-crusted carvings that glowed faintly like embers buried in ancient wood. It moved with a solemn grace, exuding a presence that felt older than any star map Riva had ever seen, regal but dangerous, like a predator that had once ruled a world and never forgotten the taste of blood. Its presence was imposing, like a walking cathedral. It did not speak. It only gestured. Riva nodded once. She had no weapon, no squad, no map. Just her boots and her instincts. And something watching her from the roots of the world. She stepped into the jungle and the way closed behind her. The trees whispered with every step. Not sound. Intention. Like they noticed. Riva moved slow, keeping her breathing even. Every now and then a branch would bend toward her path, revealing the way. Other times it would snap shut when she approached, denying her. The rules here weren't logical. They were aware. She found a clearing after what felt like hours. There were others. 3 figures, stripped of gear like her, stood in a rough triangle. One she recognized instantly, Sergeant Yates, alive, pale, shaken. The others were Bravo Squad, Mendez and Koros. No injuries, just confusion. Yates turned as she stepped in. Captain. Where the hell are we? Somewhere between a hallucination and first contact, Riva said. You okay? He nodded slowly. Yeah, just. I had dreams. Things I couldn't understand. Voices showing me things I didn't want to see. Then I woke up here. Mendez added, I think they're judging us. Not as enemies. As potential. Riva looked up. The jungle canopy above them shimmered and dozens of glowing eyes blinked open. No bodies, just the suggestion of presence. And one word etched into the earth before them in shifting roots. Riva stared at it. The simplicity made it more terrifying. No explanation, no instructions. Just a demand. A judgment. Her heart pounded as she realized this wasn't just for her. This was for all of them. For humanity. The word wasn't a suggestion. It was a warning. Choose. The weight of the moment hit her like gravity. This wasn't just about escape or understanding. This was a test of character, of species, of future. Riva stepped forward. Whatever this was, it wasn't just survival anymore. It was a trial. And humanity had just entered its first real negotiation with something older than stars. They followed the roots. Not a path. Not in the way any soldier would recognize. But the glowing tendrils wove between the trees, subtly shifting as they walked, lighting a trail that only existed because they walked it. The roots curled and unwound like living nerves, responding to presence, not command. It was less like being guided and more like being evaluated. Every step felt watched. Riva kept her eyes forward, her jaw tight, and her senses wound like coiled steel. Her boots made barely a sound on the soft, moss-covered soil, and yet each impact felt like a declaration. Behind her, Yates muttered prayers under his breath, old earth things, fragments of whispered hymns and battlefield mantras. Mendez scanned the canopy with twitchy precision, eyes darting, tracking movement that was never quite there. Koros said nothing. His silence was a tell. He was terrified, and too trained to admit it. His hands gripped his weaponless belt tight enough to blanch the knuckles, and his eyes flicked constantly between shadows like a man walking the edge of a nightmare he refused to name. The jungle deepened. Canopy branches twisted like frozen serpents, laced with strands of bioluminescent moss that shimmered in hues not found on the human spectrum. It wasn't just green or blue. It was color that pulsed with intent. No birds, no insect chirr, just the constant low hum of life watching from behind bark and leaf. Shapes moved on the edge of vision, tall and thin, or low and crawling, their limbs bending in geometries that defied human anatomy. Some pulsed with internal light, others clicked softly with mandible-like structures, watching from the dark with eyes that weren't eyes. None of them tried to hide. That was what made it worse. They wanted to be seen. The soldiers said nothing. Even whispering felt wrong. Every soldier knew fear. This was older. Something primal. It wasn't the fear of being hunted. It was the fear of being measured. After what felt like an hour of silent movement, the path widened. The roots curved inward, weaving a dome from living wood. It wasn't constructed. It had grown that way, as if the jungle itself had always known they would arrive. Glyphs glowed along the inside, not etched but woven into the fibers, pulsing in time with their steps. Riva passed under the archway and felt a pressure lift from her skull, as if the jungle had permitted her thoughts to flow freely again. In the center of the dome stood another being. It looked like the first one she'd seen. Liquid crystal head, 6 limbs, body framed in a lattice of organic plating, but larger. Its proportions were graceful but firm, like a predator that had learned restraint. His form radiated stillness, authority. Riva slowed, then stopped. She didn't need to be told this one was different. It didn't dominate the room. It anchored it. It spoke. Not aloud, but with the same mental pressure as before, only now more focused, more personal. You walk in memory. This place sees what was, what might be, what you are. The dome brightened. Images flared to life. Not projected illusions, but memory echoes, drawn from something deeper than her mind. They weren't just hers, they were being read. Riva saw her first deployment in the low-orbit combat zone of Farron's cradle, heard the thunder of kinetic drops, felt the buckling of metal under atmosphere pressure. Her first kill. Up close, the taste of copper in the air. A scream she'd never quite forgotten. Her court-martial after Eileen. The tribunals. The blind stares of men who'd never held a rifle but judged as if they had. Her mother's face in a hospital bed, whispering her name as oxygen masks hissed. Every moment scraped raw and laid bare. Koros swore under his breath. Yates looked away, eyes narrowed with reluctant sympathy. Riva didn't move. "If this is supposed to break me," she said aloud, voice gravel rough, "you're wasting your time. I broke a long time ago, and I rebuilt worse." The being tilted its head. Not disapproval, not approval, just observation. "You remember pain. This is common. You use it. This is not." A new memory surfaced, one she had buried so deep even the scent of it made her flinch. A child, maybe 5, ducking behind a crate during an insurgent sweep. The squad hadn't cleared the warehouse. Protocol said they couldn't delay. She had radioed it in, been told to move. The crate exploded when crossfire hit it. There had been blood, and the smell of burning hair. And then nothing. A tremor shot through her legs. Her mouth tasted like ash. The vision dissolved. Your kind burns, but it remembers. Others did not. She lifted her chin. You think that makes us better? No. It makes you possible. The dome dimmed. Now new images swelled across the chamber. Alien wars. Auric sieges. Worlds falling in lines of fire and bioplasma. But this time something different. Terrans and Tothi, these jungle-born entities, fighting together. The image wasn't metaphor. It was vision. A possible future carved from pain and alliance, brutal and raw. For the first time in weeks, Riva felt something bloom in her gut. A flicker of belief. The war might not be over, but it didn't have to be lost. Unity in chaos. Humans in mud-caked armor working side by side with leaf-shelled figures. Guerrilla strikes. Orbital landings sabotaged before touchdown. Hive queens ambushed in their birthing lairs. It was dirty, bloody, beautiful. War born of pain but driven by will. You are not ready, but you may become. If you survive. Riva stepped forward. Then teach us. We don't need approval. We need an edge. The figure made no gesture, but the trees around them stirred like a breath inhaled, and from the darkness came more Tathi, dozens of them. Some were armored in bark-like carapace, others robed in living fungus fiber. A few were bare-chested, their skin etched in glowing scars that shifted like migrating rivers. But all bore marks, symbols etched not for decoration, but for survival, for blood, for memory. One stepped forward. It carried a long, curved staff tipped with a black stone that throbbed with internal light. It didn't bow. It didn't speak. It offered. Then we begin. Riva's squad raised their hands instinctively, then stopped. The Tathi didn't threaten. The figure placed the staff in the center of the dome and stepped back. The stone cracked open. Light spilled out, and Riva saw what was inside. For a moment, she felt reverence. Not the religious kind, but the hush of standing at the edge of something vast and secret. Her breath caught. Not a map, not coordinates. It was a living, pulsing neural web, alive with energy, twitching with thought. The web expanded in the air, lines forming synaptic paths and converging at critical intersections. Riva's eyes tracked the shifting points. Every flicker of light a wound in the oryx hive structure. Her pulse quickened. She wasn't just looking at intelligence. She was staring at a weapon forged from patience, suffering, and a hatred that had endured. Routes, tactical choke points, oryx hive frequencies, internal vulnerabilities mapped over time, patterns of movement, genetic degradation cycles, thousands of years of silent war. The Tathi had been bleeding the Dominion in the shadows, in places no fleet could reach. They had learned to fight the structure of the enemy, not just its soldiers. Yates whispered, "Holy hell, they've been killing Dominion forces this whole time. Without ships, without fleets, just with this." Riva didn't answer. Her breath had caught in her chest. No wonder the jungle never fell. It remembered, and now, it was sharing. They trained without words. There was no translator, no shared tongue, no interface. Only motion, pressure, and memory. The Tathi taught by exposing intent. One moment, Riva stood across from a silent warrior who made no move, no gesture, then her muscles spasmed in response to a sudden pressure, a shift in the air, and she moved without knowing why. Reflex born of instinct. The lesson was not spoken. It was embedded. They called it seed training. To humans, it felt like hallucination and ambush all at once. A kind of mental grafting where thought became motion and reaction preceded comprehension. Yates took to it first. His reflexes were battlefield-honed, but it was his willingness that won the Tathi over. He stopped asking questions. He just watched, breathed, copied. He moved like moss growing toward light, slow at first, then suddenly everywhere. One afternoon, without thinking, he disarmed a mock ambush using only a bent reed and a shift in footing. The Tathi didn't praise him. They simply nodded. A seed had taken root. Koros struggled. He fought the jungle with the stiffness of a city-born marine, trying to apply straight-line tactics to a world made of curves and chaos. He sweat through his fatigues in hours, stumbled through vine-webbed ravines, and bruised his ego more than his skin. The Tathi ignored him until he stopped trying to impress and started listening to the soil. When he finally moved with, not against, the terrain, they noticed. He was reshaped like stone worn to blade. Mendez, quiet and skeptical, learned fastest. Her silence matched theirs. She mimicked leaf-fall patterns to time her movements. She smelled for ozone and fungal spores to detect weather shifts. When she began moving before being shown, Riva knew the alliance wasn't just working. It was evolving. For Riva, the lessons were not just physical. The Tathi elders, warriors, silent speakers shared flashes of memory not through technology but through proximity. A shared touch. A gaze held too long. And the jungle amplified it. She saw their wars. But more than tactics or death, she felt the weight of purpose behind them. Tathi war was not for conquest, it was for pruning. They spoke of battle the way botanists spoke of disease. Hive nests were not burned in hatred but cauterized for balance. A kill was remembered not with pride, but with ritual. Each blade carved from the bones of 10,000-year-old trees bore the names of every battle it had ended, not started. She saw symbiotic warrior castes that fed on auric spores to build immunity. Heard tales, not in words but in pulsing memory, of forests that fought back, reacting to auric incursions by shifting their entire root systems to trap invaders in collapsing sinkholes. They showed her an auric queen once, massive, gelatinous, protected by miles of subterranean lattice. It wasn't slain in battle. It was starved, its internal signaling web corrupted by the Tathi's viral mycelium. A 3-year campaign. No heroics. Just rot. The Tathi were not conquerors. They were editors of ecosystems. They survived not by dominance but by design. They don't think like we do, Riva whispered as she returned from one of the memory flashes. They don't fight like we do. Yates nodded, his face pale. No. They fight like a forest. Quiet. Relentless. And when they grow around you, you're already dead. The camp was not a place so much as a moment. It never stayed in one location longer than a night. The jungle accepted them, then released them. Every dawn, they woke in a different grove. The Tathi left no footprints. Their trails closed behind them. To Riva, it felt like sleeping in the palm of a living planet, cradled but always one twitch from being crushed. By the 3rd week, Riva no longer reached for her non-existent sidearm when she woke. She no longer checked for drones overhead. The jungle was the surveillance grid. She grew leaner, sharper, but also stranger. Her hearing adjusted first, she could tell the difference between predator silence and ambient stillness. Then her balance. Then her anticipation. Her dreams were no longer human. They came in pulses of color and scent. She woke some mornings afraid she would forget how to speak or that she'd choose to stay silent forever. Yet the fear didn't drive her back. It compelled her forward. The jungle didn't take her humanity. It offered her a different version of it. She began to feel when danger approached, not through sight or sound, but the taste of copper in the air or the sudden shift in how leaves angled themselves toward light. It was as if the jungle taught her a second language, one spoken not in words but in weather. She learned to walk between roots without touching them, to move under the canopy without drawing breath when needed. She learned to spot the auric not by sight, but by the patterns they disrupted in the fungal networks, nodes that stopped pulsing, trails that died. The Tathi taught without reward. They taught because they couldn't afford not to. And slowly, the Terrans stopped being outsiders. One evening, as storm winds bent the canopy low, the lead elder, whom Riva had begun to think of as the anchor, stood before them. It held no weapon. Just a single auric mandible fused into a staff, the chitin cracked from age. They stood in a spiral clearing where the trees leaned outward in perfect symmetry. Lightning flashed beyond the canopy, silhouetting the Tathi in stark, alien beauty. Now you speak. Now you choose. The words came not from the anchor's mouth, but through the roots beneath her boots. Riva could feel it like a pulse through her bones. The staff planted into the moss. A shallow pit opened in the soil. Inside, preserved in resin and memory, lay a Terran beacon. Her old one. The one from her suit. And beside it, a Tathi glyph stone. Bioluminescent. Cold. One calls ships. One calls silence. One calls war. One calls home. Choose. But choose with roots. Not with fire. Riva looked to her squad. Yates gave a tight nod. Mendez didn't even blink. Koros looked shaken but resolute. They had come far. But this was the edge. She knelt, stared at the objects. The beacon still held a charge. If she activated it, Terran Command would find them. Would come. With ships. Guns. Protocols. A clean sweep. Recolonization. Doctrine. If she left it buried, they would become something else. Not wild. Not alien. But other. Something with roots that drank from Terran blood and Tathi soil. Something new, with bones bent by memory and muscle trained by silence. Other now meant strength born from contradiction. She placed both hands in the pit. And buried them deeper. When she rose, the Tathi warriors around them bowed. Not in submission. In recognition. The anchor stepped forward. It extended one long arm. Riva clasped the forearm in silence. The air shimmered as spore clouds rose in gentle spirals. The jungle had chosen. Now it was time to show the galaxy what humanity could become when it listened. Not conquerors, not victims, but something else. The kind of species that could learn to speak with forests and make war like shadows. Rain fell like memory, slow, constant, saturating everything. It didn't pound or lash. It soaked. The kind of rain that wore through armor and silence alike until all that remained was breath and intention. Riva crouched in a crook of moss-laden bark, eyes narrowed as a faint vibration reached her through the root net. The jungle whispered. An Oryx scout pod had landed 2 clicks west. Not an army. Not yet. But the Tathi knew the signs. This was a probing limb, the kind that came before a hive tendril took root and burrowed. If left alone, it would call down a sterilization swarm. The jungle would not be burned. It would be scraped. She tapped the moss beneath her fingers. A ripple moved outward, no sound, just a pulse. Across the forest, her squad felt it. Mendez up in the canopy. Koros and Yates hidden below the fanged roots of a flowering predator tree. Their breath synced with the jungle now, in rhythm with a world that once rejected them but had since learned their shape. They no longer needed radios. They were the network now. When Yates shifted position under a creeping vine, Mendez adjusted her trajectory 2 seconds later without looking. When Riva blinked twice in the dark, Koros froze midstep. They moved not by command but by concordance. 3 weeks had passed since the choice. Since the beacon was buried. Since Riva had stopped calling herself a soldier of Terran command. That identity felt distant now, like a uniform worn in a different life. She was something else now. The Tathi called them the Barkflesh Pact. A term that sounded crude in translation but carried cultural gravity. It meant more than alliance. It meant fusion, a joining of survival instincts, a commitment to shared memory. A vow that went beyond treaties or orders. The jungle had accepted them. And now it would show them how to hunt. The Oryx scout wasn't alone. 3 exosentinels accompanied it, bipedal husks of chitin and fused bone, towering and hunched, with digits too long and joints that bent wrong. Inside their armor, thin hive drones remained submerged in nutrient gel, piloting the bodies through hive thought coordination. They moved without sound, without hesitation. Only purpose. The scout itself was larval stage, little more than a crawling sack of eyes and antennae wrapped around a pulsating signal core. It did not see with optics. It tasted intent, mapping emotional resonance through magnetic scent glands. Any spike in adrenaline or fear would paint its world in red. So Riva gave it none. She exhaled slowly, pressing her pulse into stillness. Around her, the jungle mirrored her command. Leaves ceased their dance. Bark tightened. Even the insects paused, a biological hush rolling outward like prayer. A silence both sacred and surgical. Above, a shadow peeled from the treetops. Mendez. She was barely a silhouette wrapped in woven vine threads, her skin coated in silencing sap. She dropped like rainfall. No arc, no sound. One sentinel fell, its head sheared clean by a Tathi blade curved like a crescent moon. Before it struck the ground, Yates moved, rising from the earth itself, caked in mud, bone, and silence. 2 precise slashes. The second sentinel's thorax split open, its inner jelly spraying across the moss. As it fell, the ground seemed to breathe in, swallowing its noise in a green hush. The jungle pulsed with them, coiled, tense, waiting for the final beat. Koros lunged for the third. But the sentinel turned. Too soon. Its claws extended, ready to gut him from shoulder to hip. Riva moved. She burst from her perch, one arm swinging wide with a toxin sap lash gifted by the anchor. It struck the sentinel's back. The chitin cracked and froze. Instantly, the neural web calcified. The creature dropped like a statue. 7 seconds. The engagement ended before the scout could scream. But it pulsed. The larval creature writhed in a full body tremor, emitting a low-frequency signal burst meant to ignite the distant hive net. Riva was already there. She drove her blade, memory wood, imbued with signal null spores, into the creature's thorax. It didn't bleed. It flickered, as though its concept of self were collapsing mid-broadcast. It spasmed, shuddered, died. The jungle exhaled. Fungi brightened. 1,000 insects resumed their slow, rhythmic chirr. Night fell in cascading phases, light dissolving into hues of violet and charcoal. They gathered near a fungus spiral grown not for heat, but for comfort. The stalks emitted a low vibrational hum that relaxed muscles and slowed breath. Around them, Tathi Warcast members moved with deliberate stillness. No words. No celebration. Just proximity. Just presence. Scout pods clean, Yates muttered, flicking auric resin from his blade. Signal didn't breach. They're testing us, Mendez said. Same as we did them. Koros nodded, sipping from a gourd of nutrient broth. Testing where we stand. What will protect? Riva didn't speak. She listened. The jungle whispered again, but differently now. Less warning. More invitation. The root net beneath her feet carried a subtle tremor, like the hum before thunder, and the scent in the air shifted, sweet, metallic, expectant. Riva felt a low thrum in her gut, like gravity pulling her towards something deeper. The Tathi turned in unison, heads tilted, eyes glowing faintly. They felt it too. A pull beneath her sternum. A sensation like gravity had tilted forward. She stood. Koros. Mendez. With me. They moved. Through bioluminescent tunnels of root and rot, guided by scent, touch, and memory. The jungle shifted around them. Trees leaned aside. Moss drew back. They passed battlefields unseen by human eyes, old killing grounds where the roots still wept. Places where Tathi blood had darkened the canopy. Where auric queens had once screamed into fungal wind. And then they saw it. An auric birthing node. Small. Shallow. Not yet awake. But forming. Its pale sacs quivered in the soil. Thin feeder tubes already spread into nearby growths. And the jungle recoiled, leaves curled, vines sagged, insects vanished. The soil here smelled wrong, like vinegar and scorched fat. The fungal pulses stuttered. Something had infected the rhythm. Riva knelt, pressed her hand into the dirt. Too warm. Too fast. The hive tether was forming. A root brain would follow. Then the node would dig deep and pulse. It wouldn't just birth soldiers. It would overwrite the biome. This isn't recon, she said. It's not a test. They're trying to grow again. Mendez's jaw clenched. What's the play? We don't bomb it, Riva said. Too risky. Spores scatter. Fire feeds some strains. This has to rot. Koros looked sick. You mean the black rot? Riva nodded. Anchor showed me. Tathi mycelium engineered to eat hive code. It kills the tether. Disrupts their emergence pattern. It doesn't live long. A few days, maybe. But it eats everything auric within 3 clicks. It'll kill the trees, Mendez said quietly. Some, Riva admitted. But less than a full hive would. This is surgery, not scorched earth. She approached a towering tree, the one that leaned closest to the node. Its bark shimmered faintly, its surface marked with Tathi glyphs that pulsed like a heartbeat. She placed her palm against it and felt warmth, like a breath drawn in anticipation. Her chest tightened, not in fear, but in reverence. The tree knew her. The tree opened. From within, a pod emerged, black, glossy, breathing slowly. It smelled of wet iron and decay. Inside were spores so aggressive even the Tathi wore gloves to handle them. Riva lifted it. Felt its heat. This isn't war anymore, she said. It's ecology. And this is a correction. They moved. She planted the pod beside the node. Spoke no words. Just let her breath carry her intent. The rot awoke. Silent threads leapt from the pod, unfurling beneath the soil like veins in search of a heart. The ground shimmered, then trembled, roots contorted, twisting like startled serpents. The hive node twitched as its signals were devoured and rewritten. The air filled with the scent of wet decay and burned copper. Riva felt it in her teeth, a crawling pressure. The rot was alive and it was hungry. The birthing sacs collapsed. The node pulsed. And then went still. The jungle inhaled. And the forest hummed in satisfaction. The forest screamed like lungs crushed under centuries, exhaling their grief into soil and storm. Not in sound, but in scent, in vibration, in the rippling shift of canopy and soil. What the Tathi called Vishotora, the warning pulse, moved through the biome like a heartbeat reversed. Trees twisted to channel the signal. Mycelial threads lit up in complex neural bursts, visible to the trained eye as flashes beneath the bark like synapses firing through flesh. All across Tolmec 3's uncharted wilds, the jungle knew. The rot had struck true. The hive node had died before it could anchor. But it had broadcast a partial signal before collapse, fragmented, incomplete, but enough. The Dominion had heard. And the Dominion responded not with curiosity, but with declaration. Riva stood at the edge of the kill site. The rot still simmered beneath the ground, invisible to sight but buzzing in her bones. It was like standing beside a silent predator that refused to leave. She could feel it unspooling in quiet hunger, digesting every auric trace molecule by molecule, its fungal strands glowing faintly in the spectrum just beyond human sight. The jungle felt more alive than ever. But above them, far beyond the canopy, something moved. Highborn signature, Mendez muttered, checking the signal slate etched into a piece of bark plate gifted by the Tathi. Her eyes narrowed at the geometric ripple in the sky. Partial cloaking. Mass immense. Koros wiped his hands on his thighs. It's a queen barge. Has to be. Yates exhaled. They're not waiting anymore. The auric had been cautious before. Sending scouts. Testing response. Now they came not to test, but to plan. Riva looked up. The shimmer passed across the sky again, like oil on water. Then light bent the wrong way. The barge revealed itself for a second, a vast, silvery wound suspended in orbit. Not built. Grown. Its hull shimmered with biometal and chitin veins pulsing across its underside. Hive ships were not designed, they were gestated. They're dropping nests, she said. The Tothi had no word for retreat, but they had 1,000 words for sacrifice. The bark flesh pact had grown. It was no longer just Riva's squad. Nearly 100 human fighters, fragments of shattered units, crash survivors, exile cells, even a few deserters who had shed their insignia had been gathered into the pact over the past weeks. Each had trained in silence, learned through shadow, shaped by memory contact, Rupal's communion, and sensory mimicry. Some had resisted. Fewer every day. The jungle did not demand worship, only attention. They gathered nightly in bioluminescent groves where humans and Tothi knelt in mirrored circles. Fungal spore pools pulsed beneath them as they exchanged breath and memory, synchronizing heartbeats and dreams. Rituals were brief, wordless, built on gesture and proximity, bodies swaying in rhythm, glyphs etched in dirt and flesh. Unity wasn't proclaimed. It was grown. What emerged were no longer Terran soldiers in jungle camo. They were hybrids. And now they stood at the edge of extinction's front door. The queen barge above would release between 3 and 7 pod nests, each one capable of maturing into a hive cluster if left uninterrupted. The jungle could handle 1, maybe 2, but not 7. The Dominion wasn't just deploying, they were seeding. Anchor stood among them, still as root. Its body bore new glyphs etched in crimson resin that hadn't been there before. They pulsed with memory, with promise. It looked at Riva. The signal was clear. They will not burn us. Not without bleeding. Preparations began before the first pod dropped. The pact worked in silence. No barking officers. No data pads. Only knowing. Fungal mortars were seated along glade lines, their ammunition comprised of high-pressure spore bombs capable of corrupting biosignals within seconds of exposure. Each mortar was alive, grown in a cradle of hollow log, its pulse synced to the breathing tempo of the jungle. When triggered, the spore bomb did not explode, it blossomed, releasing a shockwave of biochemical confusion that turned drone instincts into stuttering panic. Mycospike clusters grew overnight, coaxed into spear thorns by Tothi fungal singers whose songs bent humidity and growth curves like sculptors shaping clay. One such singer, a woolborn elder named Anai, taught human scouts to hum resonance frequencies that shaped spine curvature and hardening rate. What had once taken days to carve in steel was now grown in hours from soil and breath. Pits were carved by moss diggers, humans now barefoot and blindfolded, relying on scent and root feel to guide their shovels. Sensor webs made from the silk of spinner larvae were stretched between trees to catch the smallest disturbance. And underground, deeper still, Tothi bloom thinkers sang to the fungus below, asking it to remember pain and to replicate it. By dawn, the canopy bristled. Above, clouds churned. The barge rotated. Then the sky broke. 7 birthing pods fell in perfect arcs, like teeth. Trailing smoke, dripping resin, singing in frequencies that sent birds crashing from the trees mid-flight. The air boiled in spirals. The jungle shook. Riva didn't flinch. Split and choke, she said. The pact moved. They weren't an army. They were a reaction. Like white blood cells moving toward infection. Like rot seeking decay. Like spores seeking light through the carcass of a fallen beast. Like fire that knew the shape of the forest before it burned. What followed wasn't a battle. It was evolution. Pod 1 landed in the northern basin, a wetland of root rot and shallow water. It tried to unfold. But as it breathed its first spores, it inhaled death. Spore bombs had been seeded days earlier. The pod cracked open and released a scream that only the Tothi could hear. A death song. A birth aborted. Pod 2 made it farther. It embedded into a moss shelf near the cliffs. Outspilled 6 birthing drones already weaving signal nests. They barely had time to anchor before the root line beneath them collapsed. Not by bomb. By redirection. Tothi root weavers had sung the terrain into hollowness. The drones dropped into a sink pit alive with acid fungus. Gone within seconds. But Pod 3 hit true. It landed in a fungal grove with no defenses, too new, too distant. Within minutes, it had erected a node pulse tower, signaling for reinforcements. Already the air vibrated wrong. Nearby trees recoiled, their bark flaking as if allergic. Fungal networks hiccuped, breaking rhythm as the hive signal disrupted memory and flow. If allowed to stabilize, it would root itself into the planet's magnetic field. It would become a permanent scar. Yates. Riva shouted, the only word spoken. He leapt forward, tossing a pod black, slick, vibrating. An impulse burst from it. The node flared, then stuttered. The vines spasmed. Drones stumbled. Mendez and a Tothi war singer hit the left flank. Clay knives and sap lances moved like poetry. Koros triggered a flame frond, forcing the drones back. Riva reached the node herself, drove her memory blade into its pulse heart. It screamed, then folded inward. 3 down. 4 to go. And more dropping. The jungle burned. But it burned with intention. Not desperation. Not panic. It fought. And the pact was no longer just defending. They were becoming. The pact had no banners. No emblems. No anthem. Just breath and blood and the green weight of responsibility. As dawn cracked over Tolmec 3, the jungle was no longer simply a place. It was host, weapon, and witness. And it had chosen its defenders. The barge loomed overhead, half seen, half felt. It had birthed 7 pods. 4 remained. The sky had grown darker, not with weather, but with intention. The Dominion was watching, calculating. It did not yet understand the resistance it faced, but it had begun to respect it. The barge's next move would be surgical, focused, and final. Riva stood in the root spire. It wasn't a tower in the traditional sense. It was a single colossal tree grown not for height, but for thought. The Tothi described it as a nexus root, a living mind node where memory and decision flowed together. It had stood for generations, absorbing the fears, hopes, and deaths of countless cycles. Riva had heard the Tothi hum here in morning, not song, but resonance. They called it the echo of return. For every decision, the tree gave back the voice of one long gone. Inside its hollowed chamber, the air vibrated with chemical scent and low harmonic tones. Glyphs crawled across the bark like slow lightning, curling into patterns that required both intuition and experience to interpret. The scent of living fungus was sharp and metallic. The wood felt warm underfoot. Human and Tothi stood together inside. Anchor stepped forward. It placed one bark hand on the central trunk. A vision unfolded. For pods, for landing vectors. 3 were expected, logical, patterned, seeking open glades or weakened canopies. But the fourth aimed for the cradle. The cradle was sacred, not because it housed Tothi life, but because it remembered all Tothi death. A spiral basin of ancient rot and rebirth. A place where mycelial intelligence ran deep, old, autonomous, vindictive. It was where fallen warriors were buried not with ceremony, but with purpose. Their memories fermented in fungal form, their last thoughts used as weapons in future wars. It was not where you built defense. It was where you invited vengeance. Riva understood instantly. That's where we let them land, she said. Anchor didn't reply. It didn't need to. It simply bowed. The plan was not a trap. It was an offering. The pact would not stop the 4th pod. They would not contest its descent. They would open the cradle. Preparations were swift, but heavy with ritual. The Tothi led. The humans followed. Layers of foliage were peeled back. Vines retracted with audible sighs. The cradle bloomed like a wound, sour sweet and pulsing. Tendrils as thick as torsos withdrew from their spirals, exposing the basin's core. Beneath, the fungal ocean churned, an expanse of black and silver threads, twitching like nerves exposed to air. A faint, coppery tang filled the clearing, an ancestral scent the Tothi associated with memory grief. Some sap-born knelt instinctively. The cradle did not smell like battle. It smelled like funeral rites interrupted. The pact circled the basin, sap-born and Tothi alike. Riva stood at its edge. No armor, just bark-wrapped arms and a memory blade strapped to her back. This wasn't a moment for force. This was sacrifice. Every member of the pact that stayed behind knew the risks. None of them left. When the 4th pod dropped, it did not arc. It descended slow, controlled, arrogant. It settled at the basin's center, legs unfolding with insect precision. Chitin vents hissed, venting atmosphere laced with claim spores. Drones emerged larger than scouts, heavier, hive-bound. They deployed pulse beacons and began forming a stabilization ring. They never saw the cradle inhale. The mycelium beneath them opened, not as attack, but as embrace. Spores surged upward, thick as fog, threading through vents and skin alike. The drones twitched. One collapsed mid-signal. The beacons sputtered, flickering through misfired commands. For a moment, the hive's distant logic hesitated, confused by inputs it had no protocol for. No defense against grief-encoded aggression. In the language of the auric, it was not death. It was unmaking. The pod tried to retract. Its legs buckled inward. But it was too late. From beneath it, the cradle bit. The ground shattered. Roots closed like jaws. Memory fungi surged into hull plates, digesting biometal like marrow. The pod twisted, screaming in a frequency that bent light. The signal was devoured mid-broadcast. The stabilizer ring snapped apart. Internal membranes ruptured. Inside the cradle, ancient spores remembered wars long past, and executed them again. Neural echoes from long-dead Tothi warriors triggered reflexes in the roots. Every vine that struck was precise like a ghost blade. Riva watched, said nothing, felt everything. Above, the barge blinked. A signal cut out. One of its pods, gone. Just gone. 3 remained. Now the pact moved. Not as skirmishers, as predators. They struck Pod 5 mid-emergence, using wind-hollowed tunnels and sonic lures to isolate the drones. Mycoshields, woven from layered fungus and bark, deflected hive signal pulses. Tothi death singers opened the assault, projecting low-frequency tones that caused the drones to twitch uncontrollably. The humans followed, silent, swift, brutal. No gunfire, just clay knives, vine stranglers, and the hiss of respiration cut off mid-motion. Pod 5 died on its feet. Pod 6 tried to seed a birthing node deeper in the highlands. But the pact was waiting. 30 sapborn circled the site with Tothi shock singers. They began a war chorus, vibrations tuned to disrupt hive coherence. The chorus bled into the earth and air alike. Those who sang felt their pulse accelerate unnaturally, their breath sinking to the rhythm of the fungal beat. It was like fighting as a single lung, a single scream. The node stuttered. Drones emerged disoriented. Targeting matrices failed. Riva led the breach. Her blade moved like memory, no wasted motion, only purpose. The node crumpled inward. Pod 7 never touched Earth. Fungal cannons, grown from living mangrove stalks and charged with compressed sap plasma, fired in precision. Their goal wasn't destruction. It was nudging, just enough pressure to send the pod into a spiral. It veered, struck a limestone cliffside, disintegrated in a bloom of fire moss and calcite dust. The explosion echoed for miles. By nightfall, there was only smoke, and silence, and Riva, standing beneath a tree that bent toward her like a comrade. She looked up, eyes reflecting canopy light. A nearby blossom, dormant since the war began, opened with a soft pop, its petals glowing faintly violet, dusting her shoulders in golden spores. She spoke to everything and nothing. "We are not what we were," she said. Her voice cracked, but she didn't flinch. "We are not what they think we are." She placed a hand on the tree's bark. "But we are here, and we remember." The jungle bowed, and the stars above paused. The stars did not retreat, but they shifted. Above Tolmec 3, the queen barge held its position, silent, watching. For the first time in recorded history, an auric highborn hive ship did not immediately retaliate after the loss of a seed pod cluster. It hovered in indecision, a mind too vast, too alien, now faced with something it could not categorize. The jungle did not chase it, but it grew. From the root spire, great vines began to lift into the upper canopy, uncoiling like tendrils hunting light. But these were not passive. They were laden with pulse spores and capillary tendrils. Engineered by Tothi bioarchitects centuries ago, used only in planetary purges. Sky roots. They were not built to reach ships. They were built to infect them. Sky roots were legends. In Tothi oral memory, they were the vengeance of a planet when war reached its skies. They grew only under command from a living world node, and only in response to an existential threat. Their creation had been forbidden for nearly 600 cycles, ever since the fall of Eurothan, where sky roots brought down 3 orbital hives in a single night, choking the sky with spore fire and turning the rain black for months. The Tathi called it the morning bloom. But now the world node had chosen. Riva stood beneath one as it extended, watching the tendril rise through fog and shadow. It moved like a serpent, coiling through cloud layers, its skin dappled in spores that shimmered with violet light. Around her, Sapborn worked without command, tending growth tubes, whispering to the root net, feeding nutrient lines into vine cores. Yates appeared beside her, face drawn but alert. "They're not retreating," he said. "No," Riva murmured. "They're learning." He followed her gaze upward. "You think they'll fire? If they understand what we've done? No, they'll flee. But they don't understand. Not yet." Across the clearing, a myco-observer blossomed, its bulbous eye splitting into petals that opened toward the clouds. It tracked the barge's every move with silent pulses, feeding data directly into the jungle's neural matrix. A new presence entered the glade. Anchor, its limbs dusted with spore pollen, eyes dimmed in contemplation. It extended a hand and placed it against a sapling growing beside the main vine. The tree pulsed. Anchor's voice came, not in words, but through the ground beneath their feet, carried in a subsonic thrum and the sharp release of cinnamon-sour spores from the surrounding flora. It was like standing inside the lungs of the planet as it spoke. "They built their queens from dominance. We grew ours from loss. Both reach toward the sky, but only one will survive the fall." Riva felt the vines overhead twist slightly. They were listening, and the barge high above finally reacted, not with fire, but with dissent. The first tremors arrived before dawn. Riva crouched near a signal route, watching as tremors translated into glyphs across its surface. The hive barge's trajectory had shifted. It was descending, not as an orbital weapon, not in vengeance, but in curiosity. "They're trying to understand us," Mendes said. She was hunched beside Riva, her body draped in spore weave, her eyes dark from sleepless nights. "They've never seen this before, never lost a foothold without knowing how." "They'll come slow," Riva said, "like a scientist approaching a venomous animal." "Or a butcher," Koros muttered from nearby, sharpening a vine blade. "Same knife, different grip." Riva didn't argue. Above, the jungle shimmered with tension. Sky roots pulsed with energy, their internal capillaries pumping. Their tips opened like blossoms, exposing soft sensory membranes designed to touch hull and feed data into the planetary web. The Sapborn had modified them. They'd embedded Terran sensors, radiation meters, magnetic field readers, even salvaged transmitter loops into the skyroot veins. Hybrid technology, living and synthetic. If contact was made, they wouldn't just infect. They would map, and then they would speak. By midday, the clouds broke. The Queen barge breached atmosphere. It descended like a falling cathedral, vast, graceful, terrifying. Its lower hull rippled with thought. Antennae extended, tendrils flexed. It did not open fire. It simply watched. The barge hovered less than 3 kilometers above the jungle canopy. That was when the sky roots reached back. The first made contact with the barge's underbelly. Just a whisper of a touch. A tendril brushed against chitin. There was no explosion, no energy discharge, only connection. The barge pulsed, and the jungle responded. Riva felt it through the roots beneath her feet. A question. Not words, but pressure, texture, intent. "What are you?" She stepped forward, placed her palm on the central trunk of the root spire, and gave the jungle her answer. She showed it her first kill. The first scream she hadn't stopped. The child in the fire. Her trial. Her exile. Her rebirth. She gave it everything. It felt like being unzipped from the inside. Her memories stripped raw, emotions unfiltered, every moment relived in layered pulses. Her breath caught. The sky roots did not just receive. They devoured, translating trauma into rhythm, guilt into data, truth into scent and pattern. And the sky roots carried it upward. The Queen barge shuddered. Not from damage, but from contact with a form of language it had never evolved to decode. A ripple moved through its lower hull, like a stone dropped in water. In the hive's synaptic lattice, the message became something else. Not an instruction, not a target, but a shape of loss. Memory cloaked in metaphor. Empathy as infection. The Auric had never received a message like this. Not resistance. Remembrance. Not defiance. Transformation. Not silence. A story. Anchor stood beside Riva. Two had connected. Shared not words, but cycles. Times the Tothi had nearly vanished. Wars it had fought without allies. Losses buried in loam. The weight of becoming a people not through strength, but through persistence. Above, the barge quivered. Its tendrils retracted. Its heat signature dipped. It was listening, but something changed. Riva felt it, like a muscle tensing in the sky. "They're splitting," Mendes hissed. "There's another signal coming from inside." A new shape unfolded from the belly of the queen. Pod. But unlike the others, this descent made no sound. The rootnet recoiled slightly as it approached. Not in fear, but in warning. The air around it tasted of static and citrus. Riva felt her spine tighten, as if her bones knew something her brain had not yet caught up to. This was no delivery system. It was a message, or a test. Sleek, polished, hive gold and signal black, not meant for landing. It descended, straight toward the root spire. Riva didn't move. "Let it come," she said, and the jungle agreed. The pod did not land. It embedded, like a blade plunged into the root of the world. It struck the earth beside the root spire with a soundless quake. A ripple of distortion that made light bend and insects die mid-flight. Fungal sensors spasmed. Sapborn fell to their knees. Even the sky roots recoiled, tips curling like burned fingers. Riva remained standing. The pod unfolded. Not a hatch, but a bloom, petals of armored chitin folding outward with fluid precision. The air grew thicker, heavy with static and pheromone dread. Inside, not drones, not warriors. A single figure, tall, lithe, ridged in gold shell plating traced with nerve lattice. Its head was crowned with a crest of signal antennae, each pulsing with colorless data. For arms hung at its sides, relaxed. It had no weapons, needed none. An auric speaker, highborn caste, born not for violence but for domination of thought. It stepped from the pod in silence. No sound of footfall. It didn't walk. It glided, moving like oil over water. The earth beneath it tried to resist and failed. Anchor moved first. It stepped between Riva and the figure. The air shimmered around it, memory threads coiling in defensive response. Riva smelled sapphire and static. The ground beneath her feet felt warmer, like the jungle was drawing power. The auric raised one arm, not a gesture of peace, but of command, and spoke, not aloud, not in the root net. It projected directly into the ambient field shared between all living things. A voice not of tone but pressure, a thought that flattened lesser minds. You are anomalies, error in the pattern. This world will be corrected. The air cracked, fungi shriveled. Sapborn around Riva bled from the ears. Some collapsed, clutching their temples. Even Tothi warriors staggered under the weight of the psychic intrusion. Riva winced but stayed upright. Anchor pulsed in response, its glyphs flaring like coals. The pressure eased. A counterfrequency rippled through the jungle, reinforcing mental lattice walls grown over weeks of root pulse communion. Riva stepped forward. You lost 7 pods. You lost the cradle. You lost us. The auric turned its head, slowly, with mechanical elegance. You were never yours to lose. You are derivative, evolution stolen from extinction. Your jungle rots with defiance. Then listen to it scream, she said. She raised her blade not in threat, but in testimony. The blade sang against the air, and the jungle answered. Skyroots launched. They didn't strike. They linked. Tendrils wrapped the auric speaker's legs, its arms, its head. Delicate vines, grown in reverence and pain, connected to its nerve clusters. Through them pulsed not just data, but emotion. Hot bursts of confusion, dull currents of arrogance, and deep pockets of silence where shame hadn't yet been named. They did not wound. They read. Inside its mind, command trees, cold efficiency, worlds broken and rewritten, genetic purity enforced through selective extermination, 1,000 planetary deaths harvested for tactical adaptation. The auric speaker did not dream, calculated, and it calculated everything but empathy. The sky roots reached deeper, and somewhere, buried in neural substrate, unwanted, unexamined, was fear. Fear of mutation, fear of failure, fear of contagion by memory. In the auric's mind, memory was disease, wild, ungovernable, recursive. To feel what had been instead of only projecting what must be. It recoiled from remembrance like flesh from flame. The sky roots didn't destroy it. They showed it what it was. They opened its mind like a fungus opens wood. And in that reflection, the auric screamed, staggered, tried to cut its connection. Hive fire leapt across its synapses. Its signal crest flared with wild data, seeking its barge for backup. But the jungle held it. Anchor moved closer, its limbs outstretched not in violence but in presence. It offered memory. It gave grief. The auric choked. Riva stepped forward, her voice level. You came to correct us, she said. But we were never broken. She placed her hand on its shoulder. Its chitin twitched beneath her fingers. Small tremors, like ice cracking underfoot. Its eyes, flickering and unfocused, turned toward hers for a fraction of a second. Not in recognition, but in question. We chose to remember, and the jungle remembered with her. A pulse moved through the earth. Echoes of lost Tothi. Their voices sang through root and wind. Vines twisted skyward in spirals of light. A dozen blood fronds bloomed along the basin's rim. Wind spiraled downward as if exhaling memory. The sapborn formed a circle. Their breath became one rhythm. Every scar, every loss, every buried name beneath Tolmec III's soil rose. Together they reached out not to kill, to transform. The speaker fell. Not dead. Changed. The pod pulsed once, an internal failsafe, maybe a call for extraction, but no response came. Dimmed. Above, the barge began to rise. No signals. No weapons. Its tendrils retracted. Its underside closed like a wound. Retreat. But not from defeat. From uncertainty. From what it could not assimilate. Riva didn't celebrate. She lowered her blade, eyes on the sky. The war was not won. But something older had begun. Something born not from victory, but from witnessing. She knelt beside the auric. Its eyes blinked, mechanically, unsure. Its mind a battlefield where logic clashed with unwanted visions. It flinched, slightly, as if something soft had taken root. A scent, a sound, a face. The first thing it might remember, Riva couldn't know. But she knew it would remember. You're still here, she said. So remember what we showed you. She stood. Behind her, the jungle bloomed. Above, the stars paused. And within the soil, memory took root. The auric did not return. Not that day. Not the next. For 9 days the jungle listened to the sky, but nothing came. No pods. No signals. The queen barge vanished, its orbit fractured into silence, its vast consciousness recoiling from what it had seen, what it had felt. Riva did not call it peace. She called it the pause. Because she knew what followed. A pause was choice. And choice meant war, a new kind of war. The root spire changed. Where once it pulsed only with the weight of the past, now it listened. Its outer bark swelled with new glyphs, human patterns interwoven with Tothi thought lines. The sky roots had not retracted. Instead, they grew toward the stars, slowly, endlessly, waiting for contact. At night, teams of sapborn and Tothi ascended the branches together, tending to each vine, whispering shared instructions into the biothread. They sang in 2 languages, which slowly became one. A hybrid song of root and breath bearing into space, not a threat, but a question. Are you ready to change? Beneath the canopy, fungal webways thickened. Memory spores became denser, drifting visibly through shafts of golden light. Every breath taken near the root spire now carried the risk and the power of inheriting a moment. A life. A decision made long ago. Riva walked slowly through the grove of echoes, where every step triggered faint pulses through the root net. The ground knew her. Not as soldier, not even as pact-born, but as witness. The jungle did not honor what you killed. It remembered what you carried. The Auric had not truly fled. They had pulled back to recalculate. Their species did not abandon conquests. But they had been infected by grief, by memory, by transformation. It would not kill them. It would change them. And they would come back. Anchor called it SOV-Kora, a Tathi term that meant both echo and seed. A war not fought through fire and blade, but through memory, recursion, psychic weight. Not to erase an enemy, but to change what they thought they were. A memory war. And humanity was ready. The Sapborn no longer trained for guerrilla ambushes. They trained in resonance. Circles of breath. Sharing pulse cycles. Speaking in glyphsent and lohum transmissions. They carried slivers of skyroot in bracelets, in throat piercings, in spine grafts. These biolinked implants let them feel one another's emotions before words could ever take shape. In one drill, a young recruit froze at the edge of a fungal ridge. Without a sound, the memory of a teammate's fall, weeks prior, coursed through her arm via root touch. She adjusted her step before the fear reached her mind. It was not clean. It was not efficient. But it was evolutionary. A Sapborn scout did not scream when dying. They echoed, sending their death backwards through the network so others could remember how it felt and adjust tactics before pain reached the source. It was not clean. It was not efficient. But it was evolutionary. They wore no rank. Only rue marks. Each earned by what you remembered. Some wore losses. Others bore visions, prophetic flashes of events that had not happened, but might. The grove of echoes often whispered possibilities. Dreams shared between species. Riva carried both. She stood before the new sprouts near the cradle, saplings born from blood-soaked earth. She touched one gently. It pulsed. In that pulse, the voice of a dead comrade. A warning. A laugh. A promise. That was how they trained now. By remembering. Every new packed recruit was led into the fungal crypts, not to mourn, but to merge. They pressed their foreheads to memory bark. Saw moments not their own. Fought through others' eyes. Felt terror, joy, defiance. Knowledge was no longer taught. It was inherited. Far from the roots pyre, the Auric hive worlds began to change. Scouts returned from Tolmec III and were isolated. Not because they were diseased, but because their minds carried shape. Not code. Not command. But fragments of emotion. For the Auric, it was a viral sensation. Some began to hesitate during extermination protocols. Others dreamed without instruction. One was named Vechtan, an analyzer cast. It painted spirals across its own chamber walls unbidden. A memory of the jungle's breath had imprinted on it. Vechtan tried to report it. Instead, it wept. They did not know how to interpret these things. And so they tried to purge them. But memory does not die in fire. It germinates. Soon, the Auric would return. Not with 7 pods, but with questions. And beneath those questions, fear. Beneath that fear, the roots of a new consciousness. Riva's final act in Book 1 was not on a battlefield. It was alone, standing in a shallow pool near the roots pyre. The water was still. The roots beneath it hummed softly. She closed her eyes. Not to forget, but to become part of what would never be forgotten. She let the image rise, the face of a child she failed to save in her first battle. The smell of blood on bark. The silence after Mendez fell. And the moment the Auric speaker blinked at her, not as enemy but as mirror. These were the memories she gave. Not glory, but gravity. She pressed her palm to the pool's surface. It shimmered. The jungle received her, not her commands, not her legacy, but her truth. She had not survived because she was strong. She had survived because she was willing to be changed. As the pool swallowed her reflection, new growth burst from the water's edge, ferns never seen before, laced with silver. A glyph formed at her feet, etched by mosslight and fungal growth. It spiraled outward in bioluminescent arcs, each pulse echoing like heartbeat against the water. Not in Tathi, not in Terran, but in both. A single word. Witness. And Riva smiled. The war would not be decided by who struck hardest. It would be decided by who remembered longest.